Former TCU receiver Quentin Johnston made a name for himself as the consensus number one receiver in the 2023 NFL draft class after putting on a show last season. He ranked 12th overall in receiving yards, and among Power 5 receivers with at least 75 targets, Johnston ranked 5th in yards per route run. He boosted his draft stock even more at the NFL Combine by testing in the 93rd percentile among receivers in the vertical jump and in the 97th percentile in the broad jump. He did measure in at 6'2 3/4, which was slightly lower than expected, but his wingspan was measured to be 6'9", confirming the massive frame that's easy to see on tape. Johnston's athletic profile is consistent with what we typically see in top receiver prospects. He's a giant, explosive freak of nature, but his skill set is very rare to see in a player his size. Usually, long-framed receivers like Johnston are drafted for what they do either before the catch or at the catch point. But the most desirable element of Johnston's game is his ability to create yards after the catch. He's super shifty in the open field, and the offensive staff at TCU did a great job of manufacturing touches for Johnston to take advantage of how good he is with the ball in his hands. In 2022, 25 of Johnston's 312 routes were either jet touch passes or screens, and on those manufactured touches, Johnston gained a total of 205 yards for an average of 8.2 yards per route run. Among Power 5 receivers with at least 75 targets last season, Johnston also ranked first in yards after the catch per reception, and was tied for 6th in total missed tackles forced with 19, most of which were forced right at the catch point. A couple weeks ago, I talked about how Jackson Smith-Njigba makes defenders miss during his transition to yards after the catch, and though it's through a slightly different technique, Quentin Johnston does the same thing. He did it a whole bunch of times against Kansas in Week 6. Here, TCU called a drift concept, which combines a play-action fake with an in-breaking route. The idea is to suck the underneath defenders up with a play-action fake and to target the receiver in the space vacated by those defenders. Johnston is aligned in the slot as the number 2 receiver on the bottom of your screen, and because TCU is backed up on their own goal line, Kansas aligned their nickel, Craig Young, close to the ball for extra run support. There wasn't a hard play-action fake here, but TCU pulled their right guard, which got those underneath defenders to bite. That put Johnston one-on-one with the post safety, and he had tons of separation over the middle. But I want you to pay close attention to what he did at the catch point. As the ball was coming, Johnston got off the ground even though he didn't need to, but that allowed him to both make the catch and make the nearest defender miss at the same time. While he was in the air, Johnston turned his head to feel where the safety was, then hit him with a 180 when he landed. He broke the tackle and turned a 15-yard completion into a gain of 53 yards. Just a couple plays later on the same drive, Johnston did it again. This time he's aligned as the number 1 receiver on the bottom of your screen running an 8-yard hitch. Kansas called cover 3 here, so the wide corners will bail to stay stacked over the outside receivers. The defensive play call again made it relatively easy for Johnston to separate, but his signature 180 move put another defender in a blender, and allowed him to turn a routine completion into an explosive play. Guys who are built like Johnston simply aren't supposed to move like this. He's shifty enough to make any defender miss in the open field, even when he can't see them, and that elusiveness is complemented with the long speed to threaten defensive backs vertically. On this play from TCU's first of 2 matchups with Kansas State, the Horned Frogs called 4 verticals, and Johnston is aligned as the number 1 receiver on the bottom of your screen. The defense called cover 1 with press coverage on the outside and a single high safety shell, which put the wide corners on islands with the opposing receivers. Johnston exploded off the line of scrimmage here and won the route within the first 5 yards. He didn't run the 40 at the Combine, but he is expected to run at TCU's Pro Day on the 30th. Whether he runs or not, the film indicates mid 4.4 speed, so to me, long speed is not a cause for concern. Now, most of the time, a catch radius the size of Johnston's translates to a high success rate on contested targets. A receiver this size with such an explosive vertical jump is expected to win in contested catch situations. So Johnston's 2022 contested catch rate of just 35% definitely raises some questions. He has a terrible habit of failing to fight for the ball in the air. Here, against Kansas, Johnston is aligned to the bottom of your screen running a go route. The defense called cover 1 robber, which calls for man coverage across the board, with a post safety deep and a robber safety over the middle. That should put Johnston one-on-one with the wide corner, but post-snap, the safety did a great job of reading the quarterback's eyes. It is possible that Johnston never saw him because he had his eyes locked on this ball, but even if that's the case, it's still frustrating to watch him just wait for the ball. He could have used his massive frame to box the safety out, then just high-pointed it. There are very few defensive backs who can jump with Johnston, and even fewer who have the length that he does. He should be able to win in these 50-50 situations, but his approach to them is way too passive. Here's another example from back in Week 8 against Kansas State. TCU called a concept often referred to as spear, which calls for intersecting crossing routes with a deep clear out from the strong side number 1. Johnston is running the low cross here, and there isn't much the wide corner can do to prevent separation. Johnston created that separation over the middle, but the post safety did a great job of reading this route and met Johnston right at the catch point. But again, rather than boxing the defender out and high-pointing the ball, Johnston just waited for it. Relationships between quarterbacks and receivers are built on trust. For quarterbacks, it's often impossible to tell whether or not a receiver is going to separate at the release point. Quarterbacks give receivers chances in contested catch situations because they expect their guy to win. Johnston doesn't attack the ball like a true Alpha X receiver, and this wouldn't be such a big issue if Johnston was an elite separator, but he isn't. His route tree was limited last season. Excluding the manufactured touches I talked about earlier, he ran a total of 287 routes in 2022 and gained a total of 862 yards on those routes, according to Sports Info Solutions. The majority of his usage and production came through just 5 different routes, those being the go, the post, the slant, the curl, and the deep cross. 192 of Johnston's 287 downfield routes were one of those 5, and when running one of those 5, Johnston gained 762 of his 862 downfield yards. That's 88% of his production coming from just a handful of different routes. Now, the reason why Johnston's route tree was so limited is because he struggles to separate when the route requires a hard break. Take this play from back in Week 6 against Kansas as an example. It's 3rd and 4, and Johnston is aligned as the number 1 receiver on the top of your screen. TCU called a sticks concept with 5-step hitches from 3 of the 4 receivers aligned on the line of scrimmage. Now, I want you to pay close attention to Johnston's body language as he runs this hitch. He took a speed release off the line to sell the vertical, but watch how he pops up about halfway through his 3rd step. This tips the defensive back off to the fact that Johnston is going to break back to the ball, so the DB could get a good jump on the break and force an incompletion. Johnston has a tendency to lean back into the break before he drops his hips, which telegraphs the route to the defensive back and allows the DB to trigger on the break with better timing. He leaves a lot to be desired in terms of route running. Here against Georgia in the national championship, TCU is facing a 3rd down and 5. Georgia is in a man-free look, which calls for man coverage across the board with a single post safety. Johnston is aligned as the number 2 receiver on the bottom of your screen running a 3-step slant, and he just doesn't take advantage of the two-way go that the defensive back is subjected to here. He could force the DB to open his hips by taking an outside stem, or give a more convincing head fake at the break, but instead he just runs the route with 1 speed. Even if the DB should have been called for pass interference at the catch point, he saw the break in this route coming from a mile away. Despite his size, Johnston also struggles to defeat jams at the line of scrimmage. He's explosive off the line when he goes untouched, but when a defensive back gets his hand into Johnston's chest, he rarely recovers. Here against Michigan in the college football playoff, Johnston is aligned as the number 1 receiver on the top of your screen running a 1-step slant on 3rd and short. The DB got a hand in Johnston's chest when he broke inside, and he just couldn't fight through the contact to separate. Johnston's lack of functional play strength shows up both in his difficulty against jams and in his lack of aggression at the catch point. There are redeeming qualities in his game, but Johnston's tape shouldn't lead us to expect that he'll succeed in the role of a prototypical X early in his career. He's going to have trouble against physical defensive backs at the next level, both at the line of scrimmage and at the catch point. Johnston also had a drop rate of almost 12% in 2022, which was the 7th highest rate among Power 5 receivers with at least 75 targets. These drops are usually a result of his effort to make defensive backs miss at the catch point. He has some work to do in properly timing his mental switch from before to after the catch, which will likely lead to reliability concerns early on in his career. Now, despite the play strength issues, Johnston will still be a vertical threat from day 1 simply due to his athletic profile. He has the speed to win vertically and the frame to win a jump ball over anybody. So when he does fight for the ball at the catch point, he at least draws pass interference penalties frequently. But I don't expect Johnston to be the featured number 1 receiving option in an NFL offense anytime soon. There is so much uncertainty in how he projects at the next level. Despite fitting the mold of a prototypical X receiver physically, he struggles in areas where prototypical X receivers make their living. The team who drafts Johnston needs to carve out a role for him in their offense. He's not a plug-and-play receiver at either the X or the Z, but he will continue to create explosive plays after the catch. Johnston is electrifying with the ball in his hands, and he has the athletic traits to develop into a top-tier NFL receiver, but because he's such a projection, I ultimately landed on a mid-second round grade. Unless he goes to a team that's in desperate need of an offensive playmaker and everybody else is gone, I don't think he's worth a first-round pick. He would be a solid value on day 2, with the potential to develop into a dynamic weapon. But that's going to do it for today's video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can check out my Patreon and Twitter, both of which will be linked at the top of the description. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I hope to see you in the next one. So until then, peace.